can join in shortly. Thank you and your busy schedules for being here. We're going to go ahead and get about business. I want to go ahead and show you. Let me share the screen and this, you can find this in your Blackboard shell under session 3 as well. But this is basically what tonight's going to look like, and we're going to start with and again, welcome and comments, Dr. Revis. Same thing, welcome, and I think I've communicated with you via email. All of you know where you are with work, and I'm not going to beat that dead horse anymore. You've grown, you've been in this for a good while, and you know what your responsibilities are. So that's all I'm going to say with that. Assignment, let's talk about your assignment, discussion of assignment 2. And this was from your Glickman book. And as the direction said, it said there are many big ideas presented by the authors in the opening 3 chapters of Glickman. A lot of just great things to think about in those chapters. But Glickman, we've listed 3, and this is not limited to that. And you may have decided that you wanted to pick something else, but of these topics, you were told to pick one of them, and the one that resonates most with you based on your personal experience, to briefly describe your experience and to tell how it relates to the text of the reading. A lot of good stuff. A lot of you in many, many different directions. Let's start with the first one, supervision and moral purpose. Any of you that are online, who chose that to talk about that? Supervision and moral purpose. Did anybody choose that one? That's with us. Okay, who would like to give me just a brief comment about when you made a decision? You may not have written about that one or talked about that one, but what were they talking about? Supervision and moral purpose. What is this all about? What in your reading? What did you discover? Anybody? You gonna make me call on you? Dr. Revis, can I pick on you?
I guess.
When you look at this, supervision and moral purpose, what do you think about? What does it make you think about?
Well, anytime I see moral purpose, I think about what is my moral compass? Whether I'm talking about making decisions, how I treat others, and how I hope they treat me in return. It's just my moral compass of how I act and make decisions and do things.
That's right. Anybody? Emma raised her hand. Emma?
I just wanted to say, so I was trying to get my book out so I didn't misquote anything here.
That's okay, good.
But what I liked in the supervision and moral purpose section was where it talked about moving toward the society that we desire. And so as educators, like really trying to prepare our students. You know, so many of our school vision and mission statements include like 21st century learner, 21st century student, and all these things. And so I really kind of just enjoyed thinking about we as educators are setting up society that we want to see in the future. We talk about that so much, you know, like these are the future doctors and leaders and politicians and all these different things in our world. So thinking about what do we want society to look like and trying to aim our kids towards that goal. That was just interesting to me.
Right. Thank you for that comment. Would you, and so maybe somebody will comment on this. When you think about supervision and moral purpose, and I'm thinking about now, when you say 21st century, you know, this is 2022. almost 2023. So you're looking at almost 23 years into the 21st century. So, you know, there's a lot that has happened. So I think you can you can almost date yourself when you say the 21st century learner, because 22 years ago versus now is vastly different. So you have to be careful, even when you say becoming a 21st century learner. I think you have to be careful with that. Or a 21st century administrator. I think you're a 21st century administrator in 1923 or 2023, not you. I mean, you have to really think about those things. And then I'll tell you what stood out with me with this, supervision and moral purpose. And Dr. Revis, more so now than when you and I were administrators. Now, we were aware of things, but we didn't have to focus on things as intently as administrators today have to. And I'm going to tell you one of the things is just like with moral purpose. Just think about the issues and the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. That is a part of your supervision and moral purpose. That has to be a focus in your leadership and in your administration. Now, you know, 23 years ago, it was still a moral purpose, but it was not on the front burner like it is now. You have to pay attention to those things. You have to make it a part of your daily agenda as what you do. So, you know, when you look at your leadership, your supervision and moral purpose, it takes on a lot of characteristics, of a personality of its own that you have to pay attention to. But thank you, Emma, for that comment. Let's go to factors that describe the schools at the present. Did somebody else have a comment on the other?
Oh, I was gonna say about moral compass, like it's also different today because I mean, I would say even when I was in school, it was very strict and disciplined. We could discipline kids, send them home, suspend them, and the discipline was gonna happen. And like now it's more of a, we have to be a lot more focused on grace and trying to teach the kids almost, they're not getting that moral value stuff at home. So when we're disciplining the students, we have to now think about, hey, emotional health. How is this going to affect them at home? If them not coming to school, they're not going to eat. We can't just say, hey, they're going to go home, they're going to get disciplined for 1 or 2 days, and we're going to call the parents and it's going to happen. We are having to be the almost like a parent and think about when we are disciplining these kids, not that just it's going to affect them at school, but what's going to happen to them at home, you know, emotionally, whether they're missing, and then also put that in front of our discipline. And so now we almost have to kind of teach them how to have a healthy conflict resolution. That's just like kind of in my.
Very well said. Again, when you think about 22, 23 years ago and now, it's so different. And you're exactly right. I can remember as a teacher, I can remember as a principal, when I first started out, I can remember parents would say, and I lived in a Burlington industry town. 3 Burlington mills were in my town. People did not, the parents would say, don't call me. You handle it, Mr. Stedman. You take care of it. I will get them when they get home too. And guess what? They got it when they got home. That is not the case now. You know, as teachers, you face a lot of times when you try to do something, you have to defend yourself because they say that teacher's picking on my child. or, and that's what you're going to have to do. And I see Nari shaking her hand. You're going to have to, as an administrator, you're going to have to be able to figure out how to handle and defend those kinds of accusations when you become a leader and working with your staff and your teachers. Nari?
Two comments. Because we just had this conversation yesterday in a data meeting, and going off of what Ms. Shea said, the thing of it is, and I asked this question yesterday, we're in a time where we're more worried and concerned about their social, emotional health than we are about teaching. Some things are completely out of our control. And that was my question yesterday. I want to be sympathetic, empathetic to everything that's going on with them at home. But if there's nothing that I can do about it, then that still continues to affect me as a teacher, because they're grading me on whether or not they're learning, but their learning is being affected by something at home, which is completely out of my control, the counselor's control. There's nothing that can be done about it. And you can refer them to all these different places, but it doesn't seem to matter. The other thing is, when I think about my position or my future position as an administrator, I think when it comes to moral purpose, sometimes we have to step outside of ourselves and our own morals, I guess, to be open-minded. Because for me, I'm very old school. You get 3 chances and that's it. After that, it is what it is. Because my whole thing is, we're creating a society of children who don't understand consequences.
Right.
And I understand being kind and understanding and all this other jazz, but in the real world, there are going to be consequences for the things that they do. And I find that what we're doing lately at schools is we're coddling and coddling and coddling and coddling. Are we doing them a disservice? So for me, being an administrator, I have to take my mindset and set it aside to go along with whatever the status quo is. Because for me, it would be very hard. Because for me, when you've done something and you've done something wrong and all of the steps have been taken according to our discipline plan, now it's time for consequences. And we're not doing that. We're sitting down, we're having conversations with them.
I agree with you, Nari. And that, again, that goes back to, again, what I've said, how times, and this a lot of this has happened just in the last 3 or 4 years. A lot has, COVID has impacted a lot of changes as you're coming back and facing things. But as administrators, these are all things that you're going to have to deal with. It's real stuff.
Right.
Real stuff.
But that no consequences is starting at home. And so when they come to school, and like you said, in the real world, they think that's how it is. I had my nephew down here with me last year, and consequences at my house, we're gonna have structure. And he was so used to not having any consequences, no responsibility for anything that he did. So when I put that into play, it was like, what? No. But it starts at home with the parents, and then when they come to school, we have to deal with it and think it's going to be the same way. And so exactly, we have to teach them, like we are reteaching our kids about consequences. And whatever you do, there is a consequence, good or bad. There's going to be a consequence. You have to take the responsibility for your action. I mean, we spent the first week of school every single day going over expectations and rules. Not just my class, it was an expectation by our teachers. Every single block, that is the first thing that you did, was explain to them consequences of cell phone use, dress code, not going to class, being late to class, every single day, 4 times a day for the whole first week. Because he said that we are going to have to reteach these kids how to act, and there are going to be consequences. And the parents, same thing. He sent home, call on the phone with the word on the blog, dress code, cell phone usage. If they get caught with a cell phone, you will come to school to get that cell phone. If they're non-compliant, they're going to get RS for 3 days. If they don't give it to the principal, they're going home for 3 days. Now, he let it go for a week, the first week, but to the parents, to the kids, over and over and over again. Now, he's got pushback from some parents, but I'm going to tell you right now, at school in the first week, I see a huge, huge difference in the students' behavior. Not perfect, but a difference.
Well, and thank y'all for sharing that. And we could go on and on and on and on. But you realize that as a leader that, and I like the way Nari said it, that you've got to step out of your, you've got to think outside of your comfort area a lot of times and where you are. And you remember the buck stops with you. So you're the one that's going to have to take the bull by the horn, and you're going to have to lead and whatever. And it's not going to be easy. It's not, this stuff is not going to go away overnight. Let's go on to the next one. And I'm going to just say, who did anybody talk about factors that describe the schools of the present? Well, we just talked about it. We just talked about all that. What about, many of you talked about visions of effective schools. Somebody comment on that.
Where there's no vision, there is no future.
Right. And that's Bible. It says that without a vision, that the people will perish.
Right.
You've got to have a vision. And every school has a vision, they have a mission, and they're different. Your vision, what very quickly, what do you think is the difference between a vision and a mission? What is a vision?
The vision for me is what you would like to see happen. The mission is how you're going to carry it out.
Exactly. Thank you, Nari. You get A+. That is exactly what it is. And and it's not just a bunch of words that you put on a piece of paper to get through accreditation. It's got to be something that you live every day. Your teachers, your students, your community, they need to know and understand that. And you as the leader, your job is to put it out there and to preach it from the mountaintops and to make it, to make it real in your school. We could go on and on about that, but great job on that assignment. Those of you some of you still owe it to me, so get it to me. This is what this week is going to be. And again, you must work with your Zoom teams on this. This is your first case study. Some of you have already done it and you've submitted the work, but just again, the case study, all of you read it independently. You work on your case study, the questions for it independently. And then once you've done that, you come back together as a Zoom team. You pick somebody who's going to be the Zoom master and who's going to lead it. Somebody's got to send out the link to join the meeting, and then somebody's got to record it. Somebody's got to turn it into a Zoom video, and somebody's got to send it to each one of you to send back to me to get a grade. Emma?
Yeah, my quick question, I'm pretty sure I understood the assignment, but when you say in number 1, a 1-paragraph response for each of the questions, you meant those 4 questions there at the end of the case study, right?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I just wanted to double check that those were the questions you meant.
Yeah, that's the ones. Yeah. But are there any questions about? And again, each candidate will submit for their assignment the 1-page, 2-part reflective summary, and the YouTube again. You've got to think about what, and I don't regurgitate what the case study said. Highlight again what it says, and then reflect on it. Reflect on that, and as you reflect on it, you need to reflect on what you learned in 603 about school law. Anything that it relates to that, those kinds of. You need to reflect back that anything in your readings that you've read, that's an opportunity to talk about that. But anyway, that is again, remember that is your assignment that will be due by this Sunday night. So you need to go ahead, and if you haven't done so, schedule your team you're meeting with your team, and go ahead and get that done. Any questions about that? Okay. Let me come out of this. I want to very quickly go into this before I turn it over to Dr. Revis for an activity. Let's look at this. Now, I've most of you are on schedule with your task. Those that are not, I've communicated with you, and I'm expecting you to get that to me sooner than later. So get that in. Task 3, this is what is due. Remember, task 2 is due for a final grade on Sunday night, by Sunday night, and task 3 must be submitted by Sunday night for my review. And this is dealing with the third of the analyses that we talked about, and this is dealing with cultural competence. And again, I deliberately put a definition for cultural competence in there so that you can understand what you're looking for. And when you're cultural competence, that again, remember, that ties back into some of the social things that we talked about with diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you look at, you got to look at your community, your surrounding community. You've got to look at and as a leader, you've got to be aware of that. And I'm going to tell you, let me just tell you a real story. I live in a very, very diverse county. It has always been a very triracial county, and now is the Hispanic community is almost our county has almost become more Hispanic than it is any other ethnicity. But for many, many years, it was Black, white, Native American. I live in the county where it's the home of the Lumbee Indian, and we have the largest Native American population east of the Mississippi River. So I grew up all my life surrounded by a lot of diversity. I grew up on a mill hill. I mean, we couldn't go to the same school until they integrated, but we played ball and we were in everybody's house, so growing up. So but I will tell you this, my first principal assignment, I was sent to the far end of the county. It was as far south as you could go down Interstate 95 before you got to South Carolina. I don't know anybody that's traveled south to South Carolina on 95. How many seen south of the border? Well, I was 1 mile from south of the border. That big sign where Pedro said Buenos Dias every morning when I drove to school. That's how far south I went. When my buses turned around, they were in North Carolina, but they had to turn around in South Carolina to come back to North Carolina. That's how far I was into South Carolina. Well, I went into a very rural community. Now, here I am. I mean, Mama took me out of the oven too soon because I'm powder white. But I went into a very diverse community, and in the school that I was a principal, it was a middle school. I didn't even have 10 white children in the whole school. My school was 50%, almost 50%, or 49% African American, 40% Native American. So I had to go into that culture, into that environment, and it took me a while. I had to let people know that I was there for them, for their children, because when they looked at me to begin with, guess what was the only thing they saw? They saw a white man in that community. So I said all that to say this. And then from that, I went to a high school for 6 years, Shay. And when I went there, guess what? It was another large minority school, and it took me a while for that community to trust me. And again, it was because here was a white man going into a predominantly minority school, but I embraced those communities. I went to their churches. I went to downtown. I visited. And now it's been 20 some years ago since I've been there. I can still go into those communities, and I've got friends for life. And some of those people are now working for me in my new job with communities and schools, because I made strong friends, during that time. And I'm on a daily basis, I'm almost communicating with people from that community. But they learned to trust me. They learned to know that I truly cared about them. And so I learned the culture. I didn't go in and try to change people or change things. I became a part of. And once I became a part of, I was able to slowly make necessary changes once they learned to trust me. So that's what all this is about. Knowing the pulse, putting your thumb on the pulse of that community, that school, and embracing the culture, and becoming an integral part of it. And see, the same thing could happen to any of you. You could be a minority, and you could be assigned to a school that doesn't look as much like you. You're going to have the same responsibilities, as I did. It's your responsibility to know it, understand it, embrace it, and to make it work. And Dr. Revis, I think if you don't do that, if you can't go in with that attitude, you won't be successful there. Dr. Revis, any comment on that before we move on?
I think you've done a really good job. And I really like the emphasis you made about when you go into a new school, every school has its culture. Every school has its culture. You go in and you learn and become aware of the culture as quickly as possible. And you go in trying to be part of that culture and building those relationships and building trust before you can ever become a leader, before anybody will ever follow you.
It goes back to that old cliche. People don't know how much they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So, that's important. With all that being said, again, in task 3, and some of you have successfully completed this already, so please forgive me. But again, we've already talked about that. You're looking at what is your current vision and mission. You're talking about, and you've looked at that and some other things already, but you need to readdress it again. You're looking at school leadership based on what the teacher working conditions survey said, or advanced ed. You're looking at, teacher quality. You're looking at parental involvement. You're looking at conflict resolution. And it asks you specifically student achievement, those things that you must look at as you are doing an analysis on the culture of the school. And all of these components should be in there. Remember what I told you. Those 5 areas that you addressed in task 1 of the CAAP, those 5 areas, again, must be named and clearly identified in task 3 as well. Make sure that you don't leave that out. That's very, very important. Are there any questions about what you've got to do with task 3? And remember, you've got a good example in Blackboard as well to look at. Any questions at all? Okay, good. Okay, Erica raised her hand. Okay.
So, because I've started working through task 3, what area, taking those 5, where should we be placing those after some of these things, or build them throughout? Does it all have to be like together, all 5? Or can
No, but make sure
throughout it?
they don't have to be together, Now, some students have gone at the end and they've kind of put a table together. And they've talked about it and they've come at the end and they put a table together and they pulled a lot of what they've talked about and they identified those 5 areas based on what they've talked about. They just put it together. So that worked very well. Rebecca, I think you did that. If I'm not mistaken, I think you did that on the end of task 3. There's been 3 or 4, and the work that was turned in was very good. It met all the needs. But that's what I would suggest, Erica, looking at that. Nari?
Just a quick question, because I'm working on my stuff, but where it says do another survey if administration has changed from the previous one. I'm at a new school, but when that survey was done, the current administration was not there. Do I still need to go ahead and do that survey?
Let me see.
Because my CAAP and my PSYOP, I decided to do
No,
on my current
well,
school.
I wouldn't, but I think that what you've got to do in there is because the work that you would pull from there would address your previous school. You need to have some narrative in there and say that you've changed schools and you talk about what the current teacher working condition survey says about leadership at the school. Now, your principal was he didn't come, he wasn't there the whole last year. He just when did he come?
He came the beginning of this school year.
That's right. So
but he was the AP there for 10 years.
Okay. So,
but he was the principal at another school, and now he's the principal there.
Say that, just go back and just say this reflects an administrator that was no longer there. We now have a new principal that was the assistant principal there for 10 years. And I would talk about, that and some of the teachers that you're working with may have worked with him when he was there before. This is where you can do some qualitative research, ask questions, and, talk about, ask questions about, some of the things that's involved, 2 or 3 of those questions in the teacher working condition survey about leadership, and actually insert those things in there. That makes it all right. Okay, you can be creative with that.
Okay.
But I think under your circumstances, because of I understand the dynamics of all of that, you've got to say something in there, because it's not going to make sense unless you just simply focus on the school you came from. Okay. Let's I'm going to stop share. And Dr. Revis, I think you have an activity that you're going to work with them with. Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. If you guys will look in your chat box, I have put a link there. And I think it's also in your course shell, but just go in your chat box there and pull up that link. And this is a leadership style quiz. Lewin leadership style quiz. Has everybody got it up? Did it come up okay? Okay, go through there and take this leadership style quiz very quickly. Okay.
When you're finished with it, why don't you put a thumbs up in the chat box and that'll let us know that you're through.
And I like the way some of you are telling me the results of your quiz in the chat box.
That's actually what I should have said. Excuse me.
Okay, a couple more, I think. Okay, so Lewin says in his model or styles of leadership, and there are a lot of different leadership styles out there, but Lewin says there are three major categories: authoritarian, participative or democratic, and the delegative, or he also calls this a laissez-faire. I think most everyone was the participative or democratic. So let's look at these three leadership styles just a little bit. I think that when we see the word authoritarian, that we all say, no, we don't want to be that. But we're going to look at some pros and cons. And let me just say this statement going into our discussion. Regardless of how you came out on this quiz, or regardless of what your dominant leadership style is, there is a time and place for all leadership styles. Now, my time and place, I live mostly in that democratic leadership style, but I have to be authoritarian at sometimes. Now, the one that I don't live in very much or very often is the laissez-faire, and that's just me and my personality. And my family would say I'm a control freak. I try not to be, but I just really struggle with offering little or no guidance. That's something I work on.
Me too.
So let's look at our different leadership styles and the pros and cons is what I want to look at for each. Okay, where are our pros and cons for autocratic? Let's see. Here we go. Autocratic or authoritarian. Again, many times we want to shy away from that we don't want to be known as an autocratic leader? Well, the reason we don't want to be known is because that type of leadership allows, if you use it predominantly, little or no input from your group members. Requires leaders to make almost all of the decisions. Who wants to do that? Provides leaders with the ability to dictate not only the work methods or the end goals, but also the processes. Leaves the group feeling like they aren't trusted with decisions and important tasks. And it tends to create a highly structured, very rigid environment. Discourages creativity and out of the box thinking. And we're real laden with a lot of rules and procedures in the authoritarian mode. But there are some benefits. Allows for quick decision making, especially in stress-filled situations, or I like to think of emergency situations. You have emergency situation happen on your campus, you don't have time to get input and consensus. You've got to act, and you've got to be in charge and large and in charge. You've got to take control. So don't put yourself in a situation to think I'm never going to use that leadership style, because you should use it at some points. Or if you're in a situation, I guess I'm reflecting back on what Shay said earlier about the changes in expectations for student behaviors. Now, I'm sure that principal probably had input before school started about what procedures and what are the issues and how are we going to address it. But let me tell you what, when he's dealing with implementing this, I bet he has to be pretty directive. And he's probably going to have to be directive to some of his teachers too, to make sure they are following through with their agreed upon implementation procedures and expectations.
And parents, Dr. Revis.
Yes, and parents. So don't always think autocratic and authoritarian is bad. Okay. Now let's look at our democratic. And I'm not going through all this. All this is in that first little video that pops up at the bottom. Let's look at some strengths and weaknesses. Collaboration. You know, boy, we all know that when we can build a collaborative environment, that's huge. Not only when we're talking about student learning, but when you're talking about student expectations and teacher expectations even. We want to get members engaged, because we know that the more engaged people are, the higher the likelihood of them buying in to the end result. And creativity is encouraged and rewarded. So we like to be known as a democratic leader. And hey, I'm good with that. But there are some cons.
Dr. Revis, and just think about this. Your task of having to have led PLCs throughout the past year, professional learning communities, that is a prime example of democratic leadership.
Exactly. And you know, you talked a lot about, you've had one about communication and how to reach out and engage your parents and your community members. You've had all kinds of PLCs and all kinds of authentic tasks that you're going to be doing as a leader. And anytime you're doing those kinds of things, you know, you need to get groups involved. You need to get groups involved. Now, potential cons, communication failures. You know, you have your PLC or your school improvement team, and you're working with them and you're trying to set some expectations of instruction or of student discipline and student behavior. And those people who are working with you, very intensively and very intently. They've been there with you and they have heard all the discussions. They've looked at data, they've looked at research, and they have had a lot of deep conversations. But what about your other staff? So that can be a downfall. You've got to find ways to be inclusive with all of your staff and don't have those big communication failures. The other thing you have to be careful with is turning a group loose to take on a project when they don't have the knowledge or the skills. Or one of the worst things you can do is tell a group that you want them to work on finding a solution for student cell phone use. Well, now, if you have any expectations as a principal, you need to make sure you share those expectations up front, because nothing is any worse than for you to ask a group to come together and to look at solutions and problem solve, and they bring you their solutions and you don't like them. You don't like any of them. Well, did you give them any guidelines? Did you tell them what are some non-negotiables as far as you're concerned? So on and so forth. What are your expectations before you turn loose that group and them start making decisions collaboratively?
And Dr. Revis, that is where an administrator has the mindset that is a democratic leadership, but it's actually a form of autocratic leadership where they're still controlling everything.
The worst thing you can do, again, is to establish a problem-solving group or a PLC if you're talking about student learning, and have them come up with solutions, and then you nix every one of them.
Mhm.
That's the worst thing you can do. You won't get many volunteers to come back and be on those teams anymore. And of course, there are potential security issues. And that's one of the things that you have to do when you come together as a group. You talk about, what are our norms? What we say in this room stays in this room, or, whatever. But you do have some potential security issues when you work in groups, and that's just the way it is. But we have to remain, you don't avoid doing group problem solving because of that, or group decision making, but you make sure that you establish some good norms so that those things are not a problem for you. Any comments, Dr. Stedman?
No, any student, do you have anything that you want to say about any of these things? One of the things that you'll find, okay, go ahead.
As a principal, you want to, I guess, have your staff buy into what it is you're doing and have them be on board. So I feel like you want them to have some ownership in what happens in the school. So as you said, we want to ask them, say, hey, what do you guys think about cell phone policy, or trying to come up with a solution? So how do you set it up so that they can take ownership in what the policy is, but also, I guess, make it what you want it to be? Like, okay, this is my expectation, but I'll take your solution. Okay, that's not what I like. This is what we're going to do. And not make them feel like, okay, well, I'm just not going to offer because he doesn't listen or she doesn't listen to me anyway.
Dr. Revis, may I say something?
Of course.
I can remember, especially when I was a high school principal, I would get there very early in the morning, and there was always those people like Shade, like you get to school early and things like that. But I learned, when I was learning the culture of the school, I learned who automatically were the, quote, perceived leaders, how people looked up to. They were more vocal. Whatever they said, people seemed to follow. So what I learned to do, I spent the first hour of the day, I was always present. And if I had something really on my mind that I wanted, a move I wanted to make, I didn't just come into a staff meeting and say, this is what I planted seed. And I would take those people and I would bring them in one at a time. I said, you got a minute? And I would say, I want to talk to you about something. And I would give them my thoughts on something. I said, what do you think about this? And I would plant the seed and get the thought. And even if they were not completely with me to start with, I would start saying, and they would say, Dr. Stedman, I understand where you're headed. Had I gone into the meeting and just said it, it wouldn't have gone over. But by me doing that, and then I also knew people that they had influence over, that I could say to them, because I had that relationship with them. I'd say, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like for you to kind of feel some people out ahead of time and just talk about and kind of see where they are. By the time I got to a meeting, it was already done. And I did that in the community a lot of time with my parent advisory committees, with my booster clubs and things of that. I always had those informal conversations. I never just went into a meeting loaded.
And remember last week we talked about, with Todd Whitaker's work, what great principals do differently. One of his strong tenets is you run things by your best teachers or your teacher leaders. And a lot of us avoid making decisions or establishing procedures because we're afraid of what our naysayers will say.
Mm-hmm.
You
Do that.
can't let them run your school. You've got to do, but Shaka, as far as if you're in a small group, you just have to do a lot of, it's been my experience. I had to do a lot of soul searching about, laying it out there. Here's my final outcome. This is what I want. Now, how we get there, you gotta be comfortable and trust that, the leaders that you've got at the table have the skills that they need to make those decisions, number one. And then if you've got the right leaders at the table, they're going to tell it to the rest of your staff.
And another thing, and all of you know this, as a leader, you've got to be so careful of your body language. You've got to be careful of your facial expressions. You've got to have poker face many times. They can't always know what you're thinking or how you feel, because it may not be the time, and they're watching. And if you ask a question and you stand there with your arms folded, like this, that sends the wrong message. So you've got to constantly be aware, and you've got to, even if you don't always agree with it, you've got to lean into the conversation, and you've got to let them know, make that eye contact and let them know that no matter what they're saying and how they feel is of value.
We've got one more leadership style. And guys, I'm just going to tell you, boy, this one's hard for me. The laissez-faire, or known as the delegative. I don't work well in that world. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've not seen many successful principals. I've not seen many principals who were successful have this as their predominant leadership style. I just don't think you can do that. And this is where, leaders kind of check in, and, they just are very hands off, and, it's just, it's just a very hands off approach. Now, you may have an issue, and I can think of one time, everybody has your sunshine committee at school, who the committee decides how we're going to handle birthdays and recognize birthdays among your staff, or weddings, or births on the staff, or celebrations, and the sunshine club. You know what I'm talking about? Everybody's got one of those.
Mhm.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I could care less about that kind of stuff, and I don't get into it. I don't like it. So as long as that committee stayed within the budget, I let them do whatever, you know? So I was probably pretty laissez-faire on that one. But that's one of the only things that I can remember. And I have to always say, I will have to say this. In my working with principals over the years, if your dominant leadership style is democratic, in your first principalship, I think you have to be careful not to be over democratic. You know, our strength carried to the extreme becomes what?
Our weakness.
Exactly. If you tend to be an autocratic leader, you have to be very careful with that as a new principal, because that's your comfort zone. That's where you're going to feel the best and work the best in that box. So, you know, you just got to be careful. And again, I will say this, when you become a principal, the first thing you have to do is learn that culture, establish those relationships, and you've got to listen 5 times more than you talk.
I agree.
Anything else on these leadership styles?
Great job. Thank you, Dr. Ravis. And thank you,
Did-
students, for your comments on that as well. Great comments. A lot of great stuff has been shared tonight. What in closing, is there anything that anybody would like to say?
I hope as we went through those leadership styles, you probably thought about leaders that you've had, and where they're kind of operating. You know, you can learn from even a very ineffective principal. You can learn what not to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So always be learning, always be thinking about, you know, think about this in watching your principal. The next time there's a big or a new procedure or program or process that principal wants to take on, observe how he goes about doing that.
Okay.
Or she.
Right. Any comments from anybody? Thank y'all so much for sharing. Some of you were very quiet tonight. I'm going to pick on you next time. Just know, Tag, you're it. I have to call you out. Anyway, thank y'all so much. You know what I need this week, so if you owe me stuff, get it to me. Okay?
Good
Dr. Rex,
night.
thank you. Good night, everybody. Call me if you need me.